Welcome back to Fresh Economic Thinking. This is the voiceover to a new article called Make Welfare Better by Inching Closer to a Universal Basic Income, brackets UBI. Subtitle, Call it what you want, but letting the tax system phase out universal welfare rather than cumbersome eligibility requirements for each program is fair and efficient. As usual, one take. Here we go. Universal welfare services are good. I like it that we get to drive on public roads, kick a footy at the park, use a public library, and send our children to school without having to jump through eligibility hoops to make sure our income is low enough to qualify. After all, higher income households can afford books, backyards, toll roads, and tuition, so it seems silly to just let these households use these services for free, right? One thing that is widely thought to be very bad is middle-class welfare. But when middle-class welfare comes in a non-cash form, we all love it, whether that form is schools, roads, hospitals, and other services. But cash? No. That's a problem. So our cash welfare system has evolved into a maze of hoop jumping and arbitrary phase-outs of a huge range of different but very specific welfare programs to accommodate political whims. Take a look at this guide and see if you understand the system. And of course, there's a link there to the Guide to Australian Welfare Payments. And the closer we inch towards universal cash welfare that relies on the tax system to recover revenue rather than restrictive qualifying criteria and income-based phase-outs, the better that system will be for rewarding work and productive endeavours while saving a huge administrative cost. Some cash welfare payments are already like this, and people love them. This section's called Universality Works. In New Zealand, the age pension, called New Zealand Super, is a universal basic income, a UBI, for old people. It has no income or assets test for eligibility. Instead, age pensioners simply pay tax on their income if they work and earn above this UBI amount. Australia's age pension, in contrast, has an income and asset test that hits about 800,000 out of the 2.6 million age pensioners and phases out the pension payment at 50 cents for every dollar earned. This is equivalent to an extra 50% tax rate on earnings above and beyond any other income taxes. So if pensioners work, they will lose 69 cents to 82.5 cents from every dollar they earn. Because people in New Zealand over 65 aren't punished as much financially for working, more older people work. It's 25% in New Zealand compared to Australia's 15% for over 65s. Sure, there is higher churn, meaning the same people both receive welfare and pay taxes. But churn is not a real economic concern or cost. Churn is actually a made-up and very Australian marketing phrase used for political convenience. Churn is costless because it simply requires 2 instant and free electronic payments. But administering systems to avoid it cost billions in manpower, resources, and much more in bad work incentives. There's a footnote here. I can't seem to pin down the origins of the term churn, but a few things stand out. First, if you search Google Scholar for tax welfare churn, most results are from Australians, and especially from think tanks and political groups, not the economics journals. Second, back in 2005, ANU academic Peter Whiteford measured churn, this made-up thing, and found Australia was the lowest out of any country studied. Let's get back to it. That's a bit of a side note. Because of its great work incentives and efficiency, New Zealand's over 65s UBI, that's what I'm calling their age pension now, has even attracted the interest of the Institute of Public Affairs, the IPA, which published a report about it and not only recommended copying this for pensioners, but for students as well. It was an ode to generous and broad welfare, if ever I'd seen one. The relevant economic concept we should be discussing when it comes to welfare design is not churn, it is the effective marginal tax rate, or what economists call the EMTR. It is an income earner's marginal tax rate plus the marginal tax rate at which you lose other income or benefits. So for the age pensioners, their EMTR is 69 to 82.5%. That's effectively what they lose out of every dollar they earn. Is it really worth working to only keep 17 to 30 cents out of every dollar? Not really. Another footnote, and a bugbear of mine here, in Australia you can only work and earn below a certain income level before those tax rates kick in for the age pension, and you can only get the age pension at age 67, whereas New Zealand is still 65. Strangely enough, to get superannuation, you can do that. That's your private tax subsidized retirement savings. You can get that money at age 60, but to get the money, you have to retire. So the superannuation system encourages early retirement and less work, while the age pension design discourages all working later in life for those that rely on it. Very, very perverse, and we need to talk more about these incentives in our welfare system. Let's get back to the article. And that's the problem with our aversion to middle-class welfare. In reality, it punishes work rather than incentivizing it. And unfortunately, those high effective marginal tax rates hit a huge range of Australian households. Consider the chart below. And thanks to David Plunkett for the analysis that goes into the chart, it shows the situation of a single income family that rents their home with 2 children and a HECS student loan debt. The blue line on the chart, maybe I should describe it for listeners. It's essentially across the x-axis is the earned income of the earner in this family, and it goes from $0 to $200,000. And the y-axis goes from $0 to $125,000, and that is the disposable income. That's actually how much hits their bank account. And the blue line on the chart is how much disposable income they get based on their earned income. And it starts at $55,000, so if their family earns $0, they get $55,000 in welfare. And if they earn $200,000 in private income, once they've paid tax, and because they don't get welfare anymore, they only get something like $115,000 in their pocket. And so there's this upward sloping blue line. It shows the combined effect of welfare and taxes. Let's return to the article. So if the income earner in the household makes 0 income, the family gets about $55,000 in total welfare, and hence that is their disposable income. If they earn $50,000 from a job, then they get about $73,000 disposable income. So out of the $50,000 they earned, they only increase their income by $18,000, so the effective marginal tax rate in this range is 66%. Every dollar they earned only increased their disposable income by 34 cents. But it gets worse. Much worse. If they go and get a new job, earning $150,000, which is an above average full-time salary, and is $100,000 more than what they were earning at that $50,000 job, they lose all of their various family-related welfare payments. They must pay their HECS student loan debts as well as pay tax. So their disposable income only rises by about $18,000 to $92,000. They make $100,000 extra income by switching from a job that pays $50,000 to $150,000, but only increase their net take-home disposable income, I'm going to type that in here, by $18,000. So across that whole income range, which is what most Australian households earn, there is an effective marginal tax rate of 82%. They only keep 18 cents out of every extra dollar they earn. That is a bad work incentive. The huge difference between the marginal income tax and the total effective marginal tax rate is shown below. I've got another chart here, and it's got, again, earned income per year across the bottom from 0 to 200,000. It's got a yellow line that starts at 0, and it goes horizontally to 18,000, which is the tax-free threshold where you pay 0 income tax, and it jumps up to 20%, or 19%, I think, for the income tax rate between 18,000 and 50,000. Then it jumps up again to the 30% income tax rate. So you can see that rising tax rate. But way above that yellow line is a blue line that's basically at 60 to 80 to 100%, which is the effective marginal tax rate, which adds not only the income tax, but all those phase outs of family tax benefit, child parenting payments, paying your HECS, the phase out of rent assistance and all those things. And so the effective marginal tax rate is more than twice as high for a huge range of incomes. Let's get back to the article. For most Australian families with incomes of less than 150,000 per year, the effective marginal tax rate is way above the income tax rate. If we care about work incentives, we need to consider the tax system and welfare system together. For me, these punishingly high effective marginal tax rates, especially, I've just got a typo there, so I'm going to fix that, for family households and age pensioner households, is a huge economic cost that we could avoid by redesigning welfare to be more like a UBI. This section is called, Is UBI equivalent or better? It is worth noting that you can design a welfare and tax system that gets the same net outcome by either means testing, that's testing your income and phasing out your benefits, or by letting the income tax system do its thing. I'm going to borrow a nice clean example from the Tax Foundation to show that a UBI and a means-tested welfare program can be equivalent. Here's the case of the means-tested program. You get a $12,000 base rate of payment, but once you start earning income, you lose 20 cents of the payment per dollar of income. That's the phase out. So if you earn 30,000 of private income, you lose 6,000 of the payment to have a net income of $36,000. By the time you earn $60,000, you get no welfare payment. But then after $60,000, you pay 20% marginal tax rate, and then you get $84,000 of net income if you earn, let me just type that in here, if you earn 90,000. It's very hard to see and make sense of without the table, but I'm hoping you're following along. Now, because means testing involves reporting income changes, checking in with welfare administrators, and dealing with over and underpayment as circumstances change, you can make the same payment with no phase out. So just give people $12,000 and say, don't tell me your income, I don't care. But what we'll do is we'll start the tax system at zero. So for every dollar you earn, we're just going to start taxing you 20 cents. We let the tax system do it. This situation is summarized in the table below. And so there's another table there showing your private income at 0, 30, 60, and 90,000. How much you get from the government, which in this case is 12,000 regardless of your income, and then the taxes paid. And what you notice in the table is that you can either phase out the welfare at 20 cents in the dollar earned, or you can just pay the welfare payment and tax incomes at 20 cents per dollar earned, and you get the same net outcome, right? It's just one of them has churn. So for example, at 60,000, you get a $12,000 benefit from the payment, but you pay $12,000 tax. Right? So you've earned 60,000 and you keep 60,000. But in the previous example, you earned 60,000 and you got no benefit from the government, but you didn't pay tax. So you can do it both ways and they're equivalent. And it is this equivalent that makes sense of calls for more universal welfare payment. Targeted welfare is just a more difficult to administer way to get the same outcome as universal welfare and a simple income tax system. Probably a bit difficult, that section without the tables. This section is called an indicative proposal. Most welfare payments fall into these categories. 1, old age. 2, unemployed. 3, families or children. 4, disabled. Within each category, Australia has multiple distinct welfare programs with rent assistance sprinkled through as well. A UBI could fix the bad work incentives with the age pension by copying New Zealand's approach. I don't see why that can't also be extended to all working age individuals as well, which covers off the unemployed category as well. And remember, the IPA wanted youth allowance, which would be just the unemployed category of the UBI. So we've covered a lot of people. Families could get a smaller child size UBI for each child and a high needs UBI for disabled family members. That's it. All the categories are covered. To recover more tax revenue to maintain a reasonable tax balance, the first marginal tax rate could start at something like 35 cents in the dollar from the first dollar earned for all individuals. Then perhaps a higher 40% marginal tax rate at higher income levels. Then we just let the system fly. Of course, you don't even need to fully recover the cost of payments, UBI-style payments, via income taxes alone, as other tax bases can be adjusted during a transition period towards universal welfare. What do we get from this? Well, we could save billions in the administrative costs of the welfare system, which currently, just the overheads, cost around $7 billion per year. These costs could easily be reduced by $4 to $5 billion. We would also have a much more sensible labour force incentives across all household types, which could have enormous efficiency and output effects. Again, just look at New Zealand. Australia's got 15% participation of over 65. They've got 25%, nearly double. Concerns. This section is called Concerns. The beauty of universal welfare and letting the tax system do the work, rather than obsessing over non-issues of churn and middle-class welfare. Whoops, let me re-say that. The beauty of universal welfare and letting... That's a bad sentence. You get what I'm saying, but it's surely not that easy. Unfortunately, it is that easy. The barriers are all political. We don't want politically simple, fair, and universal welfare. Consider the case of Poland. In 2016, it introduced its Family 500 Plus child payment scheme of 500 Polish zloty. I don't know how you pronounce that. Help me, all the Polish listeners out there. Which is about $125 a month, or about 18% of Poland's minimum full-time wage, for each child after your first, and then for all children in low-income households. Now, this policy in 2019 was extended to all children, and it was intended to stimulate fertility, which is quite interesting because politically we don't want simple fair welfare, but geez, fertility, let's do some radical changes. The system in Poland has been a huge success in terms of keeping children out of poverty and helping families, and it has buy-in now across the political spectrum. It is politically untouchable, despite failing to get its desired effect of boosting fertility. A Polish-style child payment and a New Zealand-style age pension gets you most of the way to a UBI. If their experiences are anything to go by, people will love it and it will be hard to reverse. One concern is that some people will want a UBI cash welfare system, I'm just going to add that word system, to replace non-cash welfare like education, health, and other public services. But I think these services will always have a place, and a mix of public and private provision makes sense in many situations, and I don't really see those calls coming in New Zealand or Poland to any serious degree. However, I can already hear cries from the political left that if the right-wing IPA likes it, there must be a catch. The issue for the progressive side of politics in Poland was that a child UBI achieved directly much of the income security and workforce flexibility for families they were trying to achieve indirectly. As noted here, and here's a quote. For progressives and other PIS opponents, so opponents to the party that introduced this child UBI, these programs' popularity leave them with little room to maneuver except to call for more investment in public institutions such as childcare schools and hospitals. Barbara Nowacka, cannot certainly pronounce that Polish surname properly, a politician who ran the campaign on Social Security for a left-wing coalition in 2015, told me its message, which included promises to invest in kindergartens and encourage employers to offer women better job protection and flexible work, was admittedly boring in comparison. She would prefer to see the program's budget, estimated by the Labour Ministry as 31 billion zloty in 2019 and $41 billion in 2020, directed towards services such as warm meals in schools and school-based medical services such as nurses and dentists. But we know, she quotes, but we know that the 500 plus satisfies people, she said. That 500 plus is the universal plan for children. Everyone believes that it is better to have money than trust the state. That's the end of the quote on the Polish political situation. But I think this quote also shows the weird debate. On the one hand, we don't trust the state, so we want cash. On the other hand, that cash relies directly on the state. You just cannot escape these strange political baggage in the debate. A UBI for children could replace income-tested childcare subsidies, which only further add to punishing working parents. With cash, you can pay childcare, pay grandparents or friends, or even look after your own children. One feminist professor noted the following about the success of Poland's child UBI, and I'm quoting, "Family 500 recognizes the economic value of caregiving, an acknowledgement that, ironically, could give women more power within their households, even as it may discourage them from joining the formal labour market." End quote. At the same time, it keeps conservatives happy because, and I'm quoting from that same article, it reinforces traditional values that still resonate widely among the country's conservative voters. End quote. Another concern with universal welfare is that people live in units called families or households that pool resources. If each individual gets a UBI, I'm going to fix a typo here, this advantages larger households over smaller ones. For example, if you have 6 children, all 8 of you will get a UBI, either at a child or adult rate, and you will have huge economies of scale advantages over 8 single-person households getting the same adult rate UBI. This is, of course, an issue for the welfare system to some degree already, but so what? Should our tax and welfare system not incentivize people to live in economically sensible-sized households rather than by themselves? A final political concern could stem from the fact that Poland's child UBI reduced the workforce participation of mothers. Some people might see this as a bad outcome. But of course, this can only be due to the choice better reflecting the desire of mothers. After all, they are punished less for working with a child benefit that doesn't phase out when they earn money. This is consistent with findings that the program didn't increase fertility but massively reduced poverty in family households. As a final comment, fixing welfare with universal cash programs works for everyone. So traditional political dividing lines don't make much sense anymore. I'm wary that since the IPA supports an old age UBI like New Zealand's age pension, that Australia's progressives will find reasons to oppose it. One reason they could latch onto it is the fact that because family households typically are in the upper half of the income distribution, because they often have dual incomes and their working age, etc., a UBI might be on balance an upwards wealth distribution over certain income ranges when measuring by households rather than by individuals. But that's politics, I guess. Once the political leap is made, universal systems like this become entrenched. They don't become costs, they become seen as investments or birthrights, and they're hard to unwind. Targeted and means-tested welfare is the system that faces the most political risk and is also the one that comes with the biggest economic costs because of administrative burdens and ridiculously high EMTRs. And that's the end. I hope you believe me. Thanks for listening. That churn is totally fine. EMTRs are the problem, and universal welfare is the way to go. Please like, share, and subscribe, and add any comments on the website. Thanks very much.